Connect with you. But today we're diving into part 2 of a series that honestly I think is probably going to be my favorite series of the year. It's a series that we're calling Beyond. And it's a series that quite honestly I've been processing through and praying about and thinking about and studying for quite a while. In fact, if you were going to ask me this year, hey, what's the series that you're most excited about and most preparing for and most just kind of energized about and getting ready for it, hands down undoubtedly would have said this series right here, because what we're talking about in this series, I think, is one of the things that is the hardest thing for us to kind of lean into, particularly when it comes to the way of Jesus in our life, but also I've seen in my own life and in the lives of so many people, one of the most transformative things when we actually lean into it. In fact, I was telling somebody earlier today, when we figure this piece of our life out, every other piece of our life, especially when it comes to the way of Jesus, every other piece of our life just gets a little bit easier. In fact, I would even say if you're not a follower of Jesus, even still, if you care at all about personal growth and just becoming more of the kind of person you desire to be, when you get more disciplined and more intentional and more focused in this area of your life, every other area, every other goal that you have, every other thing that you're trying to get right tends to just flow a little bit easier. Now, I'll tell you, we've got a little bit of ground that we're going to cover today that I am super excited about. And so I want to tell you real quick, kind of the 3 things we're going to kind of dive through this morning. We're going to start this morning by just kind of recapping what we talked about last week in case you weren't here or in case you were here and, life happened for the past 7 days, So we're just going to kind of get our heads kind of back into what we're talking about today in this series. Then we're going to dive into part 2 of this series. And at the end of today, I'm going to tell you about a thing that I mentioned last week but didn't get the chance to share with you in detail last week called the Beyond Initiative. And I am so excited to share with you about the Beyond Initiative. In fact, I wish we could just kind of jump right there and do that. But alas, we got to hit this stuff first. So real quick, if you weren't here with us last week, I'll just kind of fill you in here. And if you were here, you can help me out a little bit if you want to. But last week, we talked about, hey, what's it look like to actually lean into this area of our life that many of us kind of go you know what, I don't know if I really want to lean into that area. I don't really know if I should lean into that area. In fact, some of us go hey, I don't really feel like I need to talk about that because I've already got that thing kind of figured out. I already know what I need to do with that thing, or I'm already doing all that I can do with that thing, or doing the best that I could possibly do with that piece of my life. But the thing we said last week that we're talking about in this series, and if you were here last week, help me out with this, we said, hey, we're talking about in this series Beyond, we're talking about how to be generous, right? How to be generous. Now, again, I would say when we talk about this, we're actually talking specifically about financial generosity, which if you're here for the first time, you're going, man, I've, kind of been avoiding church for a while because I feel like every time I show up, all they talk about is money, right? And then I finally come back to church, and of course, they're talking that day about money. And I would just say to you, listen, what we're talking about today isn't specifically and just money. What we're talking about is actually financial generosity, which sounds like it's the same, but quite honestly is way deeper than that, and I believe actually affects way more than just that. Now, we said this last week, and we'll say it again just to kind of get our heads in it this week. We said last week that there's a pretty significant difference between giving people and generous people, and that sounds like a very small difference, right? It seems like a subtle difference, but it's actually really significant. There's a very significant difference between giving people and generous people, right? We'll just kind of put it this way to start, right? Giving people do something, right? Generous people are something. And we used an analogy last week that resonated with many of you. Many of you told me that this resonated with you. So we'll just kind of hit it again real quick, just show of hands. If you were here or weren't here last week, how many of you have ran before, right? You've ever run before, right? Maybe something was chasing you. Maybe you were running from the cops. I don't know. I met the same Wyoming police officer twice in 2 weeks in this month. So, it could have been me, right? Every one of us, right? Everyone has ran before, okay? How many of us would say, I am a runner, right? I would define myself as a runner, right? Far fewer of us would say that, right? There's a difference between running and being a runner, right? All of us have ran before, right? We've all done that running thing. But runners, man, they're a different breed. Runners go out for 4 hours sometimes, you know what I mean? And they just run. Runners put running on their calendar and they don't miss a workout. They do workouts even when they don't feel like doing workouts because they know the impact of missing a workout and they know the impact of consistently making and hitting those workouts. Runners orient their entire lives around running. All of us have ran before, but not all of us would consider ourselves runners, right? Not all of us orient our lives around running. And in the same way, right, giving people do something. In fact, all of us are giving people. All of us have done the giving thing and occasionally at times do the giving thing, right? But not all of us are generous people. And we said last week also that giving people give in a moment, right? Generous people are consistent in all moments, right? They walk into every moment and every situation consistently looking for opportunities to be generous. And lastly, giving people, right? Giving people give from their emotions, right? Somebody comes in, they play an organ, or they play a song that they really love, they show them some pictures or tell them some stories and really kind of get them worked up and really get them to feel something, right? And then by the end of it, giving people are reaching for the box of Kleenex and their checkbook at the same time because they're giving from something that they've been moved by, right? They've felt this emotion, and in that moment, they're going to give from that emotion. Generous people don't give from emotions at all. No. Generous people give from something way deeper than that. Right? Generous people give from their heart, right? From the peace within them that defines their values in every single moment. And that heart is consistent, regardless of how they feel from one moment to the next. So I was thinking about this week, just trying to think about, hey, how can we get our heads around this even just a little bit more? And this week I was thinking about this. There's a series of holidays coming up here pretty quick, and there's 4 holidays that are going to hit within a 7-day span, really fast, actually a 5-day span, really, really fast, right? The first one we're all familiar with, Thanksgiving, coming up. I love how Katie was talking about Friendsgiving earlier and then Thanksgiving, and I was like, Friendsgiving actually might sound more fun for some of us than Thanksgiving, But like Thanksgiving, we're all going to go, we're going to enjoy some turkey with our family, what have you. So that's one holiday. Then the next, we'll say holiday, right, is Black Friday. So we're going to be thankful on Thursday, and then we're going to be extra thankful on Friday for all the sales that we're going to go spend our money on, right? And then after that, we're going to get around to Monday, and then on Monday, we're going to hit, anybody know what this is? Yep, Cyber Monday, right? And if you got any money left after Black Friday, you could spend that on Cyber Monday. And then after Cyber Monday, after all of that, we're going to hit the next day, which is, anybody know it? Yep, Giving Tuesday, right? Giving Tuesday, and that's only 12 years old, right? But Giving Tuesday kind of a newer thing, right? This idea that okay, you were thankful on Thursday, you spend it all on Friday, or most of it on Friday. If there's anything left, you spend some of that on Monday, and then if there's anything left after that, hey, maybe you should give that on Giving Tuesday, right? Which, quite honestly, I would say, Giving Tuesday in that stream of events, right? Giving Tuesday isn't generous. Giving Tuesday is just, guilt relief. Okay, let me just do something good for somebody else after I have just loaded my cart, right, on Friday and Monday. Now, I'll tell you, Giving Tuesday really is designed for what it's called. It's designed for giving people, right, because they're going to capitalize on your emotions in a moment to motivate you to do something on a particular day. For generous people, they don't need Giving Tuesday. Generous people just kind of flow right by Giving Tuesday, right? Because they don't need a Giving Tuesday to tell them to give because they're not giving from their emotions. They're not giving because their calendar told them to. They're giving from their heart consistently because that's just who they are. Now, I told you last week, quite honestly, in most areas of life, it's not that hard to convince people to give, right? We could tell you about a need right now. We could talk about something. We'd say, hey, we all want to give right now to something, right? We can get people to give, right? It's not that hard to get people to give, okay? But it's really hard to convince people, including myself, convince all of us to be more generous. Particularly because there are a few things that are just consistently in the way of us becoming more generous people, or at least we tell ourselves that these things are in the way. We looked at this last week. We'll hit it real quick, right? Last week we said, hey, all of us have a certain relationship with money, right? All of us make money or borrow money or steal money. I mean, you get money in some way, shape, or form. You couldn't have gotten here today without money, right? So we all have money, right? And then from that, right, we all spend money, right, on things that we need and things that we desire, right? We spend money, and then we save money. And then after that, if there's anything left, right, we kind of give money, right? We give it away. And many of us, we kind of give then based on what's left, which is dictated by our spending and by our saving, which is why the two things that actually aren't in the way, but actually feel like they're in the way, are our spending and our saving. We said last week there are two orientations, right? Two types of people in our world when it comes to money, right? There are those of us that are naturally spenders, right? And those of us that are naturally savers. And last week we talked specifically to the spenders, right? How many of you were here last week? Where are the spenders at real quick? You have spenders? There you go. you actually came back. That's awesome. I love it, right? Right? Some of us are spenders, right? Like you show up to the store and you're like ready to go, right? You're at the checkout line at Target or Menards, checking your phone, waiting for the direct deposit to hit so that you can run that cart on through, right? Some of us are just oriented that when we get money, our natural inclination, our natural response is to immediately begin to spend money. And that's natural for many of us, and that's normal, right? All of those of us, right? Others of us are savers, and today we're actually going to spend our time talking specifically to savers, right? Now, I'll say this though, real quick. If you're a spender by nature, hang with me for a few minutes because everything that we're going to talk about when it comes to savers is going to directly connect with you as well, and I think you're going to see pretty quickly that you have just as much in common with savers as you have in difference from them. Now, I'll tell you this real honestly. It's kind of hard to write a message to savers, at least a message that's engaging, because, I say this as a saver, like my natural propensity is to save, right? Like I told Emily when we got married, you're going to hate me now, but you're going to love me in retirement. You know, it's kind of what I told her, like my natural inclination when money flows my way is just to kind of like save money, right? But I was thinking about this, like it's hard to write kind of a message towards savers, quite honestly, because we're some of the most boring people in our world. You know, like we're not that exciting. Like we get money, and our first inclination, like the first like fun thing for us is, let's go put that in the bank, you know? Let's go sit back and watch some compound interest, baby. It's going to be a good day. You know, like that's like fun for us, right? Let's just put it in there and watch it grow. Like we're the only people for whom like interest is interesting, you know? Like we just kind of like love it, check it, watch it, get excited by it, and really that's not all that exciting probably for most of the world. But right, for those of us that are kind of like inclined towards saving, that's just naturally what we do. Now, I will say all of us, right, if you're inclined towards saving, if you've ever saved before, right, we tend to save, right, not necessarily for something, but we tend at the deepest levels and like in the biggest moments, we tend to save, not for something, but for someone, particularly the person we save for the most is your future self and my future self, right? I save for myself in the future because I don't know what myself is going to need in the future, right? Your future self might have an emergency. Your future self might need a new car. Your future self might like to retire. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like your future self might like a certain lifestyle when you get to retirement, right? Like there's so many things that your future self might need, right? And your natural inclination is to save for not something, but for someone, that someone being your future self, which really kind of begs the question for all of us, right? Like how much does my future self need? I remember when I was kind of early on in life, I just kind of started working. I remember sitting down with a financial advisor for the first time and talking with him. And he asked me the question, he said, hey, how much do you want to save for retirement? And I'm like, I don't even know, like $1 bazillion? You know, like how am I supposed to answer that question? I don't know. I'm like, how about you tell me how much I should save for retirement? I'll tell you how much I can save for retirement, and then we'll just both sit here feeling sorry for my future self. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. Like I don't know how much my future self is actually going to need because I don't know my future. And so the answer for all of us when it comes to that question at the end of the day really is just more, right? Like my future self might need more, and so my current self better save more for the sake of my future self. And that's understandable, right? Like quite honestly, that's why it's harder for us to be generous with money than it is to be generous with our time, right? Like we'll give our time away faster because you can't give your time to your future self. But money, I can save money for my future self. And quite honestly, right, we do this because it's wise. Like it's the wise thing to do, right? It's the thing that you should do, the thing that you ought to do, the thing that you're taught to do, the thing that's wise, right? Like you should prepare for your future self. It's just kind of like the wise thing to do in that. And even spenders, quite honestly, spenders, you know this. You desire that. And in the moments that you have like buyer's remorse or like you spend, you go, oh man, I spent again. I should have saved. The reason you kind of feel some remorse around that is because you felt like maybe you were a little bit unwise in that moment, because you weren't saving for your future self and you weren't preparing for your future self. And quite honestly, some of us feel behind when it comes to saving for our future self. And that creates anxiety for us. Like you're a little bit worried for your future self, and you're a little bit concerned that your future self might look at your current self with disdain and frustration, right? Because you feel a little bit behind in that. And so if I could convince you of anything this morning, I just kind of try to convince you of this, that whether your orientation is saving or spending, all of us share the same concern, right? That my future self might not have enough. Now, that's not greedy. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? It's not greedy. You don't want extravagance in your future. You just want to know that you'll have enough in your future, and that's natural, and that's normal. In fact, people have felt that in every era of history along the way. In fact, 2,000 years ago, people were feeling that, which I believe is why Jesus actually took time to speak to that, to one of his earliest audiences during his time on earth. In fact, during his time on earth, Jesus tells this story. He just kind of pauses in the middle of a crowd of thousands of people, and he tells a story. And he tells a story about one man, but it's really a story about every man and every woman and everyone. Now, if you were to open up your translation of the Bible and start flipping through to this story, the translators of your Bible likely will have given this story a title, like a little subject line, a little title line right there to help you find it faster, right? And the title that they give to this story, they call it the parable of the rich fool. Let me just point out a couple things about this real quick, right? They say it's the parable of the rich fool. First off, a parable. Parable is simply a story, a fictional story that is kind of written or designed to make a point. And often details of the story are exaggerated and embellished because it's a fictional story, so you can make it whatever you want it to be. Often there's these exaggerative or kind of these kind of enveloped details for the sake of making that point really, really clear. Right? And so Jesus is going to tell a parable, a made-up fictional story about someone for the sake of making a point. Right? He's going to exaggerate at times a little bit for the sake, again, of making that point really, really clear. But the other thing about this title that's interesting to me is they call it the parable of the rich fool. But quite honestly, when we read this story, the way that this individual operates and the decisions that he makes are decisions that most of us, in fact, probably all of us, would look at and go, that's not foolish, that's actually wise. Those are actually wise decisions. He's actually doing the right things in this moment. And yet, the title of the story is the parable of the rich fool. And what you're going to find in this story is that Jesus tells this story to actually point us beyond the things that seem wise to us and to point us to a deeper level of wisdom in our world. So Jesus tells this story, and he starts it like this. He says, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. Now, here's the thing about this. Jesus is telling this in a very agrarian culture, a very farm-based culture, okay? Crops are currency in this culture, right? This is value in this culture, okay? This is the equivalent for us today of like a great bonus at the end of the year. This is a promotion, right? This is a great commission check. This is a tax return that you weren't expecting, right? This is your business finally taking off. Or maybe this is like the kids finally moving out of the house, you know? Like things just got a little bit easier, right? He just gets this windfall, like this significant amount of money in one moment that he didn't see coming, right? Because crops are currency in this moment. And when he receives this, he does, quite honestly, what all of us would do, or at least what all of us would hope to do. The man said to himself, he said this, he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and all my goods. I'm going to save it. It's like us going, hey, you know what I'm going to do in this moment? Perfect, finally, I can open up another 401k. Perfect, finally, I can save more for retirement. Perfect, finally, we can pay off the house. Like, perfect, finally, we can store this up and prepare ourselves for our future selves. And what I can't use today, I'll save up for tomorrow because I'll probably need it tomorrow. And then the man goes on, he says, I will say to my soul after I do this, after I save this up, I'll say to my soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Soul, finally, you have enough. Soul, your future self is going to be so happy with your present self because you have made the wise choice, because your present self has prepared itself for your future. And he said, after I do that, I'm going to save this up, and then finally, I'll relax. Finally, I can lean back. Finally, I can take a deep breath. Finally, I can feel comfortable and feel like things are going to be okay. And finally, I can eat, drink, and be merry in this moment. Now, quite honestly, this doesn't seem foolish at all. This just seems wise. In fact, I would say this is all you want, right? He's not doing something extravagant. He's not building a mansion for himself. He's not going out buying diamond jewelry for his wife, though she probably wouldn't mind that, He's not being wasteful. He's not just blowing it all. No. This isn't greed. This is just a good idea. And so after he does this, in the story that Jesus is telling, God actually shows up. And God says to him, he shows up, he says, congratulations, you finally saved enough. Congratulations, you did it on your own. Congratulations, your future self is going to be so happy with your present self. Congratulations, you are so wise. No. God shows up, and God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? And this man, in this moment, quite honestly, discovered the thing that generous people already know and have already figured out. That you can't save your way into self-sufficiency or security because you don't actually have complete control of your future. Just ask anyone who planned to retire in 2008. Just ask anyone who made all of the right decisions and still lost all of it. Just ask anyone who was ready and had a plan and prepared everything and then had a major life crisis in their own world that took all of it away from them or kept them from being able to use all of it. And so what this rich man thought he had, which was peace of mind, and what this rich man thought he had, which by all of our natural understandings was seemingly wise, what he actually had was not security. What he actually had was false security. The illusion of having enough. The illusion of being in complete control. The illusion of being prepared for whatever might come his way. You know what's riskier than not having enough? Actually believing that you do have enough. And actually believing that you've taken care of everything yourself. When you actually allow yourself to think that you have, you actually put yourself at greater risk. And so God looks at this man and God calls him fool. Why? Not because he saved it all, but he calls him fool because he believed that he had prepared for himself. And in doing so, he actually restricted himself from living the generous life that God would actually have called him to. So now, after telling this story, Jesus makes the point of the story, and Jesus looks at this crowd of people around him, and he says, so is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. So is the one whose default response to money is to flow money towards oneself and toward one's future self. So is the one whose first priority is to take care of me and the future version of me. So is the one who desires to put themselves in a position to relax and believe that they can actually create full security for themselves. So is that one. And in doing so, that one just might lose their own soul as well. And in doing so, that one might actually lose the place within them where life is found to be the greatest, where God actually shows up the most in their life. I'll be honest with you. When I read this passage and I read Jesus' teaching on this, I get it. Like, I understand it. Like, there's not a piece of me at this point in my life where I go like, oh, yeah, no, like, I want to push back against that. I'm like, no, of course. Like, of course I ought to naturally lean towards God's kingdom. Of course I ought to naturally lean towards the things that God desires to do in my world and partner with him in those things. Of course I ought to flow my resources or let resources that flow to me flow on towards God's priorities around me. I get like intellectually, I understand it. But I also struggle with it because I'm the only person who's thinking about my future person. I mean, no one else is saving for me, and no one else is preparing for me in that way. And I'm willing to bet that you probably feel that on some level as well. And I think Jesus anticipated that, not just in us, but also in the people he was talking to in that moment, which is why Jesus' very next words to his disciples were to continue to talk to them about their relationship with money. But it took a different turn. And honestly, he said a series of words that many of us, if you've been around church at all for a little while, you've probably heard these words of Jesus before. But often we don't directly equate these words to Jesus' teachings on money. But the words that we're about to see in just a second that Jesus says next, he says in several different gospel accounts, but every time he says them right after giving a hard teaching about money. And so some of us like to take these words that we're about to read and we like to just kind of put a broad application on them and just kind of apply them to all of our life, or maybe even just the parts of our life that we want to apply them to and not apply them to other parts of our life. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But I say if you don't take Jesus' words in the way that he originally says them about the thing that he originally says them about, you're actually going to miss the punch of these words and the intent of these words, and they're never going to permeate your life in the way that they were intended to permeate your life. And so we're going to read these words in just a moment. And as we read these, I want you to understand that when Jesus says these words, he's not talking about every part of your life. He's talking about our finances. He's talking about our relationship with money. So I want us to read these, but in a way that just allows us to kind of soak them in. And so I'm going to read these a little bit slower this morning. And I want you, if you will, just for a couple of minutes, just to sit in these words and maybe soak in these words and allow these words to maybe move further than your ears. Allow these words to move maybe even further than your own mind. And maybe allow these words just for a couple of minutes to permeate your heart. This is what he says about money. Jesus said, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on." It says, "For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing." He says, "Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn. In other words, they don't even have a place to save it. They don't even have a place to put it." He says, "And yet God feeds them." He says, "Of how much more value are you than the birds?" Do you believe that? Do you actually believe that in all of God's creation, in all of the things that he has made, that he actually holds you more valuable than any of it? That when you sit down and watch a sunrise, or you sit down and watch a sunset that just takes your breath away, when you sit down and you see an animal that you just don't even can't even get your head around, you're like, how did that happen? I don't even understand that. Right? When I sit at the window and just watch squirrels run through my yard like crazy, I'm like, man, what kind of life are you guys living? I just let myself just be in awe of creation. When you have those moments where you're just in awe of creation, your Heavenly Father sees that. And then he sees you watching that. And he's actually more in awe of you than of that. And he actually cares more for you than that. Believe that? He says, and which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, if you can't even take your time forward with you or create more time for you in the future, why are you anxious about the rest? In other words, if you can't do that, what else can you do about your future? He goes on a bit later. He says, "Oh, you of little faith, do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried." He says, "For all the nations of the world seek after these things." In other words, those who aren't even aware of what God is doing in our world seek after those things. That's like what normal people do. That's what natural people do. That's what people who aren't aware of their Heavenly Father do. It says, and your Father, though, your Father knows that you need them. He says, instead, seek his kingdom. Seek the things that he seeks to build in the world. Seek the things that he loves. And these things that you worry about, these things will be added to you. Listen, if I could convince you of one thing today, if there's just one thing that I could just get you to soak into your heart and actually begin to believe and actually begin to trust and actually begin to hold on to, if I could just get one thing for you, if I could convince you of one thing, it'd just be this: that I can be generous today toward God's priorities. I can be generous today toward the things that God cares about in my world. I can be generous today toward the things that God is doing in my world. Why? Because my future needs are his priority. My future needs, the things that my future self, that my current self doesn't even know about, the things that are so important to me, the things that I worry about and stress about, my future needs are actually his priority. And in all of his world, he cares about you, he cares about me, he cares about future you, he cares about future me in a way that we can't even fully wrap our heads around. And your Heavenly Father invites you into a way of living and being that is so much bigger than you and so much bigger than just the things that you are going to need down the road and so much further beyond you. And he wants that way of living so much for you that he is actually willing to take full responsibility for your future. But we have to let him. We have to open our hands. We have to open our hearts and actually allow him to take full responsibility for us and full responsibility for our needs. And quite honestly, for most of us, we resist this. I resist this. In the same way that we resist asking our parents for money, because it makes us feel dependent and it makes us feel like we're not in control. But quite honestly, we never were in control. Quite honestly, we are dependent. Your Heavenly Father invites you into a way of living and a way of being that actually involves letting him care for you. But part of it, the beginning of it, is actually opening your hands today. Opening your life and your heart to him today. And trusting him with your future. Because your future needs are his priority. Now, last week, I told you about a group of churches 2,000 years ago almost that just got their heads around this in a way that, quite honestly, I don't know if we'll ever fully get our heads around this. And when it came to generosity, this group of churches in the region of Macedonia, this group of churches just understood what generous meant. In fact, there's a letter where the Apostle Paul writes to another church about these churches, and I told you this last week, he's kind of like bragging on these churches to the other churches and telling these other churches about how generous these churches in Macedonia are, and he tells them that they like gave out of their extreme poverty and their abundance of joy. Like they recognized that they didn't have really much of anything, and then they were also super joyful because they also recognized that they didn't need anything because they had a Heavenly Father who cared and provided for them. And because of that, he actually says they gave beyond their means, which just seems irrational and crazy. But he also, the way he talks about the way that they gave in such a way that was like communal and corporate and collective. Like they were generous together, not individually, which quite honestly I think just flies in the face of our American culture around giving, because for many of us, right, we've seen like we give in like spaces that like if you give a certain amount, your name ends up on the wall, or your name, ends up on the end of a pew, right? But these churches, like they didn't do this individually, like they did this communally and collectively, like they just were unbelievably generous. And Paul actually wrote a different letter, not the one we read last week, but wrote a different letter to those churches. And in a portion of that letter, he writes to them about their generosity. And I think what he says to them is like just phenomenal and actually reminds me of something about us as well. Paul writes this. He says, "And you Philippians," which Philippi was in the region of Macedonia, he says, "You Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me. So no one else connected and was generous with me," he said, "in giving and receiving, except for you only." He said, "Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs." Once again, they didn't help me, but you sent help for me. But this is what he says that I think is just the kicker. He says, "Not that I seek the gift." He says, "But I seek the fruit that increases to your credit." He says, "It's not like I'm celebrating you, but I'm not celebrating your money." He says, "What I'm celebrating is the things that you were able to do because of your generosity, the things that flowed through you because of your generosity. And the fruit," the other way this gets translated, "is the profit that accrued to your account." And it's not a financial profit, right? Some of us have been in spaces that were taught, hey, if you sow money, you get money, right? Like it's like you give money, you get money. It's like this weird like pyramid triangle scheme thing, It's like this weird like kind of money machine, right? He goes, no. He says, it's not that. He goes, things are happening. Life change is happening. Ministry is happening because of your generosity. He says, I'm not celebrating the gift. He says, I'm celebrating the fruit. And so today, what I want to do, quite honestly, is I want to celebrate the fruit that's been credited to so many of your accounts. In fact, over the last 12 months, I just want to celebrate this. Over the last 12 months, 150 households in this church have been generous toward what God's doing through this church. You've given intentionally with your resources to fund what's going on in this church. And I just want to celebrate you, not because of the gift, but I want to celebrate the fruit that's credited to your account. I was looking at this week. It blew my mind. Over the last 12 months, because of you, we've been able to create environments for kids where 256 unique kids have checked in to experience what it looks like to follow in the way of Jesus with us on Sunday morning. The thing that blows me away is that 115 of those kids in the last 12 months checked in for the very first time to learn three things. The three things we talk about in this space: that God loves them, that God made them, and that Jesus wants to be their friend forever. Can you imagine what their life is going to look like when they hold on to those three truths and they build their life on those three truths? Right? Additionally, because of your generosity, right, we were able to provide Mega Sports Camp. This was phenomenal over the summer, where 54 kids engaged. 24 of them came for the first time. 24 kids came to our church for the first time because of Mega Sports Camp. Right? Over in student ministry, we had 102 students attend over the last year. 25 of them, a quarter of them, walking through our doors for the first time. 34 of them went on a student missions trip to serve and have an incredible life-changing experience because of your generosity and through your generosity. We launched dinner parties over the last year where 88 adults connected to engage in conversations about what we talk about on Sunday morning and actually look to live them out and engage what the way of Jesus looks like in their life more. That happened through your generosity. We had 2 Go Mad days with 29 projects throughout our community. You can laugh at Rob right there, Stacy. I love that. Right? 2 Go Mad days, 29 projects in total throughout our community, right? Fueled and made possible because of your generosity. 150 people last Christmas received Christmas meals who otherwise wouldn't have had a quality meal to put on their table at Christmas. And we heard about that. We said we feel like every family in our community ought to have a great meal at Christmas. And because of you, 150 people who otherwise wouldn't have had a great Christmas meal. And then when our sister church in Ukraine called and said, hey, we don't have reliable power right now because of everything that's going on with the war with Russia. We don't have reliable power to serve our community. We need a generator. It took us about 2 weeks to say yes to that. And we didn't ask you for anything because you'd already been generous. And we were able to just send them thousands of dollars to buy a generator in Ukraine so that they wouldn't have to stop serving their community when the power stopped flowing through their building. And in the midst of all of that, while all of that was happening, 16 people over the last year took a step to be baptized, saying yes to Jesus and experiencing the life that comes with knowing him. Isn't that phenomenal? Can we just celebrate what God's doing? Through the generosity of so many of you. And I mean this in the words of Paul. This is fruit that is credited to your account. We're not celebrating the gift, but we're celebrating what God does through the gift. And so as this year ends, I want to give all of us, between now and the end of the year, I want to give all of us an opportunity to bear even more fruit. And I want to give all of us, quite honestly, through this series, to actually have the opportunity to take a step in the very thing that we're talking about, and to collectively and communally, all of us, in the same way that these churches in Macedonia operated, not individually, but they were generous collectively and communally. I want for us to collectively and communally experience a step of generosity together as well. We're going to do that through a thing called the Beyond Initiative. I mentioned this last week. I'm going to tell you about it this week. And honestly, I'm so excited about this. I might be more excited about this than anything going on in our church between now and the end of the year. Maybe sans Christmas Eve, but it's a close tie. You know what I mean? I have to be excited about Christmas Eve. It's my job, I guess. I don't know. I'm really excited about this. Now let me tell you real quick about the Beyond Initiative, right? So here's the thing, all right? So as a nonprofit, right, it's typical for us to see like gifts given at the end of the year, right? Over and above our normal monthly giving. A lot of people at the end of the year kind of give generously at the end of the year based on business decisions or tax decisions or what have you, and that happens. It's normal, right? At the end of the year, we usually see that. And based on past history, right, it would be typical for us to expect, let's tell you openly, it'd be typical for us to expect $50,000 over and above our regular over and above our regular monthly giving to come in through what we would call like end of year gifts, like gifts in this portion of the year. We would typically see about $50,000 come in. Now, that's like if we didn't talk about this, if we didn't teach about generosity, if we didn't care about generosity, if we whatever, like we would just kind of expect that. But quite honestly, I just want to challenge us to go beyond that. I want to challenge us as a community of people. If you call this church your home, I want to challenge us to take a step corporately, communally, and collectively to be more generous than that and to grow in our generosity, because generosity is a lifelong sport. Right? Generosity isn't hey, I finally arrived. In fact, generous people, we talked about this last week, generous people never say, I'm generous enough. So I want to give all of us an opportunity to experience what it's like to be a part of a community that is generous together. And so my goal for us, and I'm going to tell you what this would allow us to do in a second, but my goal for us between now and the end of the year, over and above our typical monthly giving, over and above regular tithes and offerings, my goal for us is that between now and the end of the year, we would see $75,000 in additional funds over and above our typical monthly giving. And some of you look at me, you go, you're crazy. And I'm like, yeah, probably a little bit crazy. But I want this for us. And I want generosity for us. I want our hearts to be challenged and moved and shifted for us. And let me tell you what that would allow us to do. Okay? It allows us to do three things. The first thing is this. It would allow us to strengthen our ministry fund, which is what we would typically be doing at the end of the year, right? It's $50,000 that would allow us to strengthen our ministry fund. That's typically what we would see at the end of the year. Again, as a nonprofit, right, we see a lot of heavy giving on the end of the year. And so ending the year strong is important for starting the year strong. And we want to start 2025 running out of the gate. Honestly, our team has exciting plans for 2025. I'm stoked for what's going to happen through the life of this church and in the life of this church and through us in 2025. And I don't want to start the year questioning whether or not we're able to do everything that we would hope for, plan for, and do in 2025. But how we end 2024 is how we start 2025. And so this allows us to strengthen our ministry fund, which allows us to just keep running strong in co-kids, in youth, in our discipleship ministries, and in worship gatherings like this one right here. Okay, that's the first piece. Now, honestly, that's what we would typically do on a normal year. On a normal year, I told you, we'd typically see about that amount come in. It would strengthen our ministry fund, and we'd just keep going. But I don't want to just do that. I want us to go beyond that. And so the Beyond Initiative actually would allow us and will allow us to also invest an additional $20,000 locally and globally in partners beyond us, organizations doing incredible things that we aren't good at, but that we think ought to be done in our world, right? It would allow us to continue investing in Family Pathways Christmas meals and providing Christmas meals for families that don't have those. Typically in the past, we've asked you to give separately for that. We say, hey, you know what? We just want to do it, right, through the Beyond Initiative. Additionally, it would allow us to invest in a few GOMAD partners. These are organizations that we serve with. If you've been at GOMAD, it's a day where we just show up and serve our community beyond our walls. This would allow us to invest generously with GOMAD partners where we've shown up with our time. We want to say, hey, we want to do something even harder than showing up with our time. What's harder for most of us than showing up with our time is to be generous with our resources. But we believe in what they're doing so much that I want us to be generous towards them. And this would allow us to go beyond ourselves and do this for them. And then lastly, it would allow us to continue providing supplies for our Ukrainian church and send another wave of resources to them, right? We've sent the generator last year, or earlier this year, I should say. But we recognize that they continue to run through supplies so fast as they serve their community that is just continuing to experience the havoc and the chaos of being in or near a war zone. And we want to invest significantly in Pastor Sergey and Big Family Church in the Ukraine and partner with them. And the Beyond Initiative allows us to do that. And the last thing the Beyond Initiative allows us to do is to further our outreach with an additional $5,000. This allows us to provide scholarships for Mega Sports Camp. We want to make sure that Mega Sports Camp can come at no cost to any kid who doesn't call the Cove their home, because we want to be a church that's not for ourselves, but for the people around ourselves. And it would allow us to invest in our digital front door. Right? Quite honestly, our digital presence, particularly our website, et cetera, hasn't had a significant or intentional investment in quite a while. But we know that when you are the church outside of this church, and you're talking about our church outside of this church, and you're inviting your friends who need a church like this, one of the first things that they do before they walk in our doors is to look online and check us out. And we want them to experience the best version of us after you've been done telling them about us, because we want to be a church not for ourselves, but for them, and this allows us to continue to be that kind of a church. No, I'll tell you, the Beyond Initiative is going to launch November 24th. We're actually not going to begin, even like if you were like, hey, I want to donate today, I'm just going to tell you, no, you can't, not possible. And here's why. I want us to actually lean in together to this series and to Jesus' teachings about generosity. And I want us to pray about this. And I want us to go, Jesus, what would you have me do? What's the step of generosity that you're actually calling me towards? What's it actually look like for me to become more generous? For some of us, we could just real quick, just go yeah, I want to give to that. Okay, great, done. And then move on. And never actually let it permeate your heart. Now, I don't care about the step. I care about this. Because every piece of your life is going to flow from this. So we're going to open this up on the 24th, but what I'm going to ask you to do between now and the 24th, and if you need more time than the 24th, you've got till the end of the year in total. But I'm going to ask you to be praying. I'm going to ask God, what would you have me to do? And I would even say this, I don't even want you to pray about like a dollar sign right now. I'm not praying about a dollar sign right now. Not yet, no, we've got time for that, right? My prayer right now is, God, what are you trying to do in my heart right now? I want you to be able to pray without numbers. I don't want you to think about numbers. Right now, I just want you to think, God, what does it look like for me to be more financially generous right now? What are the things in my life that cause me to resist moments like this? What are the things in my life that cause me to say no? Or what are the pieces of my life that I'm not willing to let go of? Or the parts of me that I wouldn't be willing to sacrifice? Yeah, God, I'll open up this piece, or allow you in this space, but not this space. What are those things? What are those barriers for me? What are the off-limits parts of my heart when it comes to the way of Jesus? I want you to have time and space to pray about that.